When you put smoke and atmos into the set and then use a mole beam, you'll get these lovely lines. We were discussing whether we were going to tidy this up. Inside, I'm going, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" I go, yeah, I wanted it to feel really raw.
What is going on, D-Mogul? My name is Ted, and today we are talking about the cinematography of The Handmaid's Tale, which, if you haven't seen it already, is one of the best shows on Hulu, and it was shot by Colin Watkinson, who we're talking to today, to not only talk about the actual visual style of the show, but break into a little bit about the camera, the lighting, the lenses, and the challenges that went into shooting and crafting the look of the overall show. So, let's do this.
I was asleep before. That's how we let it happen. My name is Offred. I had another name.
Just to kick this things off, what was the process like working on this show and developing the style?
It started with a phone call with Reed Morano. First phone call, she talked about color very clearly, very defined conversation about color. The production designer gave Reed bunches of swatches of red. On the scouts, we'd go around with different swatches, and eventually it came down to one piece. We take this piece out and photograph it in locations, and you really get to get a feel for what a color would do in various locations, and its intensity, its depth. There's a saturation to that red that really works in a lot of circumstances. You put that into a space and it dominates the space. I had to go to, it's the Handmaid's Tale. And, the whole idea of the style of the very formal style I've done on The Fall or other stuff, and her very classic, her verite style, put those two together, and it was going to create this sort of, world of Gilead and this real world that we know, and that was going to create the tension and make people feel scared that this thing could really happen.
So you're saying that basically from a camera language place, there was a difference between the two worlds.
The real world was verite, handheld, real, and then there's this world that this a very controlling world where women's bodies are out of their own control. And we talked about Vermeer, volumetric lighting, and that leads to painterly. It's like a painting. You can stand there and stare at a painting for hours. Nothing's happening, but it's it's got these layers to it that sort of just if everything's done right, the story will be there in light and composition and whatever's in the painting.
What was the camera and lenses package that you guys chose, and what was the reason for it?
It was an Arri Alexa. The Mini is a great choice of camera because it's small and versatile. The lenses we chose were Canon K35s. There's a creaminess to the Canons that's that comes out straight away, and that with the Alexa is very beautiful. So it's like, okay, that's great.
Well, lighting is one of the things that I really like to nerd out about, especially in this show. So there's a lot of exciting things I want to talk about. Are you ready to jump into the first scene?
Let's go for it. This is the first time you see Offred in the Waterford house in Gilead. We get lots of information about Gilead right now in this first 2 minutes. She's sitting in her prison in her room. This is her world, and she can't escape. And this is our first introduction, cinematography-wise, into Gilead, with these very beautifully composed shots, very slow moves. Everything's very considered.
How is this created? Not
only you have the sunlight coming through, you got your ambient coming through, and then you got your background to light as well. Just for the window bit, you got those three things to light. This is a 10K mole beam is basically what comes through the window. We took a long time to get the right flavor in beams. We would net some of them. We would chop down the amount of light coming onto the blind there, so it was just the right amount of light on the blind, didn't burn too much. Then there's the amount of bounce back. We've got another window on the right, and we had light coming in from that window to create the amount of ambient in the room. Even though you don't even see that window, that's where the ambient's coming from. And then the right amount of atmosphere to get that feeling. Wider lenses, the atmosphere, the lights will cause these beams. But if you go on a longer lens, because you're trying to see through a lot of atmosphere, it becomes very muddy. So it becomes a very different thing. So you've got to take the atmosphere down when you go on longer lenses. You can't get an LED that big that does that. So we have to, I knew, at some point you have to go with, older lighting. And we want to light just for that white flat, and then there'll be another 12K bouncing into a white flat as well on the left-hand side.
Wait, so this is deceptively more fixtures than I thought it'd be. So there's three lights really in that one window.
Yeah, well, four. There was another.
Why did you ask the question? Hold on, let me rewind this for a second. Colin, you said, how do you think that this was lit? It's very simple.
So every single window had a sky panel on top of it as well.
What? Why?
Every window had a sky panel, so we could make skylight.
For a shot like this, you said that you did sweeten it up a little bit too, as far as the light for the close-ups.
Yeah, so it'll be a book light. So it's probably a grey with a white, and then it'll be an L10 into the white, which then comes in through the grey. On the Handmaid's Tale, I used grey silks. I didn't use white.
What's the reason for that?
Because I knew I wanted to keep it down, and I just found that when I used a lot of white diffusion, there was a lot of blooming, and I doing a lot of work in trying to control the amount of like white spill that goes everywhere.
Okay, let's move on from this simple setup. Let's go to the next shot. You ready for this?
The next one will be really easy. Watch.
Now, before we move on, I want to talk to you about Squarespace, who's honestly going to be your next best friend when it comes to building any kind of following or audience. Now, in a lot of our interviews with a lot of different filmmakers, a lot of them talk about how important social media is to their growth. The problem, though, is that today there are so many platforms to point people towards. You've got your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram, your production company's Instagram, your artsy photography Flickr, you've got your Vimeo, you get the idea. But let me just tell you real quick that Squarespace actually has a super handy feature that lets you link and connect all of those accounts into just one page with the click of a button. And for us, we actually do this ourselves. We have all of our social media pages linked at the top, so people don't have to dig through Google searches just to find out what we're doing. And then really, after that, all you have to do is just choose from over 200 top-level domains that work for you. And this is the really first step for putting your name out there. And you can start today by going with a 14-day free trial if you type in squarespace.com/IndieMogul, which is also going to give you 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, you can find the link for that in the description down below, but thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. And now, back to the episode.
So this is the start of episode 1, season 2, and she gets taken to Fenway Park with a bunch of other handmaids, and with a fake execution because of their that they defied Aunt Lydia in the end of season 1. They fake a hanging, and then they get taken back to the Red Center and get divvied out more torture.
What strikes me different about this scene is that the visual style becomes almost like explicitly horrifying and scary. When it comes to crafting a scene like this, what were the biggest challenges?
This particular scene, I think the biggest challenge was knowing it had to be Fenway Park. So we went to Fenway and we saw the enormous scale that place is at, and then working out how to shoot it. Straight away, I just thought, well, if that was what they were going to do, they would probably put the lights on, the stadium lights, but not all of it, because they were a little bit green. But they wouldn't have brought in other lights. I thought that they would use what they had. I wouldn't beautify the light. So it's really quite raw. It's hard. It's raw. It's nasty, which I thought was the right thing to do for the scene. So we had to find a ballpark that was basically on the top of a hill, and the location guys did, and it was amazing. And very little around it. We thought, okay, that'll work, and then we brought in 2 extra cranes with lights on, 2 LRXs, and added to the lights that we had in the stadium. We decided that these 2 backlights were going to be the winners into the most powerful of the lights, and then we had to build a black fence all the way around. Basically, we gave the effects guys our cast against a black background. They put in the Fenway in that black background we provided them with. The only thing we were using from that park was the ground. Even though Fenway would let us shoot there, to make the ground look like it's been aged and to go to ruin for the last 3 years, the art department went in there and literally put all those tufts of grass and everything all in there. We built a tunnel on the same stage that we shot where they come out the vans, because I wanted those beams coming in. I think it was like 5 or 6 12Ks each side.
The thing that kind of overarches all of them is there needs to be the feeling of this hard stadium light from very far away, no matter where we are.
Yes, I wanted that a really bright end, so you didn't know, you come out and you're sort of like almost blinded. There's a lot of talk in production design and with the writers and the showrunners about how things would be built in Gilead, what would be used. Bruce was always very useful with that, about how they would, if they were going to do this, what would they make it out of? So it was always a very practical sense to, like, if I was going to put lights in, you'd say to Bruce, well, where would they get the lights from this? Or they go down to Home Depot and get some emergency lights. So that's what we put in. I remember shooting that going, God, I've got a hard light from the front there. That's terrible, isn't it? But it's messy and gritty.
And it fits the scene.
This had to be ugly.
We have to be quiet. How is she? Let me see. There isn't a lot of bleeding. She might have.
Did you notice it was one shot, Ted?
To be honest, when I was watching it in the show, I didn't really think about it.
I like that then. The fact that you didn't even notice it. You shouldn't notice it. You should only be along with the ride, The story was that she's in the basement with a terrorist. The Guardians are there, and you've got to use light. We could use their flashlights to tell the story. They're moving around the house, moving around the room, circling the room. We just try and really amp up this whole fear. And then, it's incredibly tense. If you don't break away, you're only ever with our main character.
When you're framing something like this, you talked about the composition of it and not wanting it to be the same the entire way through. What's the reason for that?
Storytelling, when someone tells you a story, it's got different arcs to it, how it's told to you, how what's described. And, that's what storytelling is. And I think with composition, it should be the same. The move is the first thing. The move with the action. What does our character need to do? And then it's a physicality process. I can physically get here. Then you go with the gaffer going, all right, we've seen the path. What do we know? How do we do? I think we have one here. We have one here. This goes off when I get here. So we mapped all that out, So me and Jonathan talked about that. Then he would rig that, map it in on his iPad. And again, it was lots of lighting cues. We used those Titan tubes on this one. I think there's about 13 separate lighting cues. So they're in the ceiling and they were all different places, and they would go on and off and down, up and down as we went throughout the scene. So they didn't create shadows, and we could see people at the right time.
When you're talking about the interactive lights, is there like a general philosophy of how the lights interact? Is there something that you're trying to avoid?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the lighting shape, and not overlight. It has to go seamlessly from one to the other. And it's so funny doing that. At minute 3, you're going, oh my God, we're so far in. Nobody make a mistake.
How do you approach lighting in the dark and making it still feel ominous while visible?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. This shot here does actually. He does have an highlight in this. I remember grading it because I put one. There's one just to the right of Elizabeth's head there. There's a stereo tube. Again, it's like, when do you need to see in the eyes? And when don't you, or when can you get away with not doing it? Tricky on a one shot like this. That's the important bit, right? That's if you don't have that, everything else is a waste of time. So what is lights off? So your eyes can see stuff, right, when you're in the dark. So it's like, okay, there's light coming from that window. It's not a lot, and you kind of falsely bounce it around the room. You go over and look at it for real. It's like, well, it carries for as far as it looks, like 2 seconds. And then I need another light here to carry it more. I'm carrying the same feeling of light, but I'm faking it.
And there's very few times that we don't need to see the character's eyes, but we're there to shoot the performance.
Yeah, no, and it's how we see that performance is the cinematographer's that's your job.
And in the same way, in a scene like this, we're daring to tell something that's very, very dark, that, is risking possibly not being able to see performances and things like that. I think this is a scary thing for a lot of filmmakers coming in, is being afraid of breaking the rules too much or being afraid of taking too much of a gamble on the visuals. What advice do you have for DPs out there that are trying to be a little bit more bold with what they do here?
Yeah, experiment, I think, is, with digital, we have the opportunity to see it straight away. Something as simple as just, if you go in a scene, just put your hand on the iris, turn it all the way one way and turn it all the way the other. Start seeing what you're seeing. If you like something down there, going, why do I like it? What do I need to do to get there, to get that feeling, to get that mood? Just play with, think of it in layers and then play with it in layers as well.
Thanks so much for coming on. I think that's it.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, guys, there you have it. There's your episode of Indie Mogul with Colin Watkinson and the cinematography of The Handmaid's Tale. Now, if you want to find more information about this, we'll leave the link in the description down below to more of Colin's work, as well as the podcast link that we did with Colin, where we actually talk about not only how he became a cinematographer, what he learned throughout the process, and also talk a little bit about his first experiences on the show. Again, thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Start by putting your brand out there by going over to squarespace.com/IndieMogul for 10% off your purchase of a website or domain. But Indie Mogul, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Ted, and of course, we'll catch you guys next time. Okay.
3 lights. 4 lights.
Five lights. I think it might have been 6, actually. Plus, that's just one window, and there's two windows. There's a second window somewhere else.
Yeah.